This week I want to share with you a bit of a what we eat in a week video with some from scratch fall inspired meals. Now, I feel like lately I have been in a little bit of a cooking rut. It's been busy. We have been definitely spending more on groceries than I typically like to, because instead of planning my meals around what we have on hand, what we have stored in our canning pantry and in our freezers, I'm just either going to the grocery store or deciding to make meals not based on those items that we have to use up. So I'm really trying to get back to a place where I'm planning things out a little bit better and cooking some fall-inspired meals with the weather getting a little bit cooler has been helping with that. So this first meal I'm going to start out with is a pork chop recipe. Super simple and quick to come together, and we're going to be having it with some bone broth rice tonight. I'm using brown rice, and anytime that I cook grains, rice in particular, I like to cook them in bone broth just to add a ton of nutrition, add some extra protein, and also it's a great way to just add some flavor. I couldn't fully comprehend just how many pork chops we would have until we received our first pork back from the butcher after raising them for ourselves a few years back, and so that naturally has become something that we need to incorporate into our meals a lot more. And what goes better with pork than apples? So this is definitely something that is on rotation quite frequently in the cooler months. So I'm starting with a cast iron skillet, nice and hot, and I just have a little bit of lard in there, and I'm getting those pork chops seared on both sides. The pork's not going to fully cook on the stovetop. I'm going to cook these for the most part in the oven, so I'm just looking to get some good color on these. While those pork chops are searing, I'm getting some apple and some onions sliced up, and also a couple cloves of garlic minced. I just pull those pork chops off of the skillet, and I'm going to transfer those apples and onions in there along with the garlic, and I'm going to allow those to sauté for a few minutes until they start to develop a little bit of color and soften. And then I'm just adding in about a tablespoon of flour. I'm using a gluten-free flour blend. This all has been seasoned with some salt and pepper, of course, as well. And once that flour has kind of cooked there for about a minute, I'm adding in some broth, and this is going to make a little bit of a sauce with those apples and onions. I like to do a little bit of Dijon mustard as well, and then this is just going to continue to cook for another minute or two until it starts to thicken up just a little bit. When I have them, I like to add in some fresh herbs. Today, I'm just doing a little bit of dried thyme in here and then transferring those pork chops back into that apple and onion mixture, and these are going to finish cooking off in the oven. This is something that I end up making pretty frequently throughout the fall months. And so we're just having those pork chops with the apples and onions over some of that rice. It's also great with potatoes. Now, typically I'll have this with some of our green beans on the side, but honestly, I just kind of forgot about it until I was plating this up. So we had virtually no vegetables tonight with dinner, but it turned out delicious. With raising our own meat birds, we tend to leave a lot of them whole, and the main reason for that is because after butchering, sometimes I just don't feel like putting in the extra time to break them all down. But I did with our entire last batch this fall, and I'm so glad that I did because it just makes quick meals really, really easy. So I'm doing some chicken thighs tonight. Pulled those out of the freezer, let them thaw, and I am seasoning these pretty heavily with some salt and pepper. Of course, that's how anything good starts out. And then also adding on some dried parsley, and I like to do some smoked paprika. Smoked paprika just has a little bit of sweetness to it, and it works so well in this recipe. Now this is going to be a one-pot dinner, so I've got a little bit of lard heating up, and I'm just going to sear those chicken thighs, not looking to fully cook them. While that's going, I am just prepping my veggies. So we're going to get a bunch of yellow onion cut up so that once that chicken is seared, I can pull it out of the pan to set aside, and we can get going with those veggies. So the onions going in, also of course doing a bunch of garlic, and I'm just gonna allow that to saute for a couple minutes. It's going to develop some good color, and then prepping my mushrooms. These are actually not going to cook in with the onions and garlic. So once that onion and garlic mixture is nice and soft, I'm adding in wild rice. This is actually a brown rice and wild rice blend, and I like to get that into the skillet to just toast a little bit to add a bit of flavor, and then adding in some broth. Now, a theme for this next couple of recipes is using up some cider. I have some cider in the fridge, too much for us to go through before we need to, so I'm trying to find ways to incorporate it into meals. Along with the broth, I'm adding in some of that cider, and then I'm going to stir in those mushrooms and then just add in those chicken thighs over top. And this is actually going to cook in the oven. So I just put a lid on top of this, throw this into the oven for a bit, and then once it's almost done, I'm going to remove the lid and allow that to continue cooking uncovered for a few minutes. If you wanted to make this even simpler, you could just skip the step of searing the chicken and sauteing the onions and garlic and just mix this all together in some sort of baking dish or skillet that you have a lid for that's oven safe, and pop it in there. The wild rice cooks perfectly this way. Super easy, very few minutes hands-on, and this makes for a great weeknight meal. The cider adds so much good flavor. This would be great with a little bit of fresh parm on top. I just did a little bit of fresh thyme, and this made for great leftovers as well. As much as we love a roast, I don't cook them all that often because typically they are cut quite large, and it means lots of leftovers for us, which really, roast leftovers is not a bad situation to be in, but we don't always want to eat the same thing days in a row. So I found at our local co-op a very small cut of a roast. It was just about a pound, and that was perfect for us for dinner and leftovers the next day, but it didn't leave us with a ton. So in the spirit of using up more of that cider that I had to get through, I'm doing a apple cider braised roast. And for this, I need lots of yellow onion. Now, we have lots of onions from the garden, and I am trying to get through all of these little ones that we have because they are going to go bad first. They're not going to hold up for very long. So I would do just a couple large yellow onions. In my case, with trying to use all these little ones up, I'm doing just a bunch of those and getting them sliced. Into my cast iron Dutch oven, I'm adding just a little bit of butter and adding in those yellow onions to begin to cook. This makes for another great weeknight meal because, again, very little hands-on time. Most of the work is just done in the oven for you. So adding in garlic, of course, seasoning that well with salt and pepper. And once those onions start to brown a little bit, I'm adding in some cider. To clarify, when I'm referring to cider, I'm talking just pressed apples, not hard cider. I think depending where you're at in the world, you may be thinking cider as in hard cider. This is just a pressed apple juice. So for my roast, I am just seasoning that with some more salt and pepper. And before I get that roast added into my cast iron Dutch oven, I'm adding just a little bit of flour. Again, I'm using a gluten-free all-purpose flour, and that is just going to help to thicken the sauce as this cooks. Now I'm adding in the roast and just pushing those onions to the side a little bit so it can sear just a bit to develop some good color. And in there, I'm adding a ton of potatoes. I'm using banana fingerlings that we grew in the garden this year and a bunch of carrots from the garden as well. And same thing with those yellow onions. I've got some smaller carrots that I'm trying to get through before we get to the bigger ones because they're not going to hold up quite as long. Adding in a little bit of broth, also adding in a few sprigs of fresh thyme because I had it in the fridge. And then this just gets covered up and put into the oven, and it's gonna cook in there for a few hours at 325, and cooking in that cider and the broth is just going to make that roast super tender. It pulls apart really easily with a couple forks. And if you want your house to smell real good while something's cooking, this is something that you definitely need to try. I'll leave the recipe, what I did, in the description box down below. This is for sure going to be on repeat for us. These were all the perfect comfort food. They smell so good while cooking, super easy, and not a whole lot of hands-on time when you're having a busy week. And as always, I'll have the recipes in the description box down below.